30 to 70%, depending on the research and depending on who you are, of our days is communicating. It's a huge amount of our time is communicating in some form or another. Think about how much of our days are designed. The apps we use, our offices, our cars, everything. It's all designed, but something that takes up potentially 70% of our day, we don't design. And when you get that level of planning and thought, you're more likely to actually get what you want.
Business Focus.
On today's episode of Business Focus, you are going to come away with a really good understanding of how to create narratives that drive the results that you're after. Narratives in all their forms are tools for change, but if you don't know how to create the narratives in the right way, you're not going to get the change you're after. And I think really the key thing is that if you don't know how to create a solid narrative, you're not going to get the results you're after, whether that's at work or home. But really, who teaches us how to create a powerful narrative? I've certainly not had anyone pull me aside and teach me. And the best I've done in terms of getting some advice, some insight, was when today's guest came into First Focus and told us how to create good narratives and get the results we're after. So with that somewhat stuttered intro done, I would like to welcome Ron Schwarz, who, of course, is the founder of Brass Tacks, and who also is a subject matter expert when it comes to driving change for leaders, businesses, and just people in general. So welcome.
Hi, Brendan. Thank you for the opportunity.
Very, very, very welcome. Now, look, I initially got confused between sort of narratives and conversations, and you have the concept of sort of big C, little c conversation. Do you want to just first make the distinction between, I guess, a narrative and a conversation, and then we'll drive in from there?
Yeah, okay. There's actually not that much difference between narrative and conversation, especially the capital C conversation. 30 to 70%, depending on the research and depending on who you are, of our days is communicating.
Right. Makes sense.
And so, you think about how much from when we wake up to when we go to bed, it's a huge amount of our time is communicating in some form or another. Not all of it is capital C conversation.
And capital C, you mean really just two people chatting, basically?
Structured, thoughtful conversation.
Okay, right.
But it's funny how often we use small c conversation thinking when we're doing capital C conversations.
Right.
Capital C conversations actually require us to think in advance and plan.
Presentation, basically.
It could be presentation. It could be something like what we're doing today. Okay. It's a thoughtful conversation. You and I have...
Well, you're making some assumptions there about that I've put some thought into this, but sure. Yeah, I appreciate that.
But we've both thought about what impact we want to have through this, which is actually one of the core questions that you need to ask yourself with a capital C conversation. What impact am I hoping to have from this conversation? What do I want to change? What do I want someone to do as a result of this? And when you get that level of specificity and when you get that level of planning and thought, you're more likely to actually get what you want. Think about how much of our days are designed, how much of our lives are designed. The apps we use, the podcasts we listen to, the tools we use every day, our offices, our cars, everything. It's all designed, but something that takes up potentially 70% of our day, we don't design.
That's true. I'm actually now retrospectively putting your concept there of the narrative and the big C conversation into what I've already done. I mean, I know that the intent of this conversation is that the viewer will come away with the ability to craft a narrative that gets some of the results they want, and that puts that end result, and you work backwards from there. So I guess the thing there is, well, how do you build to get that result? And you've spoken about stories, how they work to drive a narrative. So why do stories work so well?
Yeah, stories are great at inspiring change. Stories connect with people. We're social creatures. Mm-hmm. Humans like being with each other. If you go back to McClellan's motivation theories, it's one of the three primary motivations. It's, this idea of affiliation. Trust is an important part of that. And stories help us understand each other. They help us understand our motivations, and they communicate some quite often fairly complex information in ways that we find familiar.
Mm. This is reminding me of Sapiens, the book where he talks about, the why humans have been so successful as a species is our ability to create a myth that we all align to, or create stories that we all align to.
Yeah. And if you actually think about stories, they activate different parts of the brain to facts. So facts and data only activate 2 parts of the brain. Stories activate 7. So if more of your brain is working when you're listening, chances are you're going to hear the message better.
Well, okay. Right. And so, okay, so that's why they're so powerful. So then, I mean, let's take a step back, I guess. Like, what's at stake here? If you can get this right, what's the return?
Okay. A lot of people look at me funny when I say this. If I remember the first time I said it to you, you probably, looked at me funny, and I suspect
where that
others
number come from.
But basically, the ROI of story is 2,706%.
Explain.
Okay. If there was a research project done by journalists called the Significant Objects Project, what they did was they bought seemingly useless items that have little value, if any, at flea markets, garage sales, just all these trinkets and things like that.
Yeah.
Then what they did was they advertised those same items on eBay with stories attached to them.
Okay.
And what cost them initially $128, they sold for just over $3,600.
Hence the 2,000.
Hence 2,706%.
Okay.
Okay. So a story can potentially attribute more value to something in our minds.
And why do we care so much about that as humans? Like, why is story? Why is associating a backstory with something so valuable to us?
Well, if we go into the whole trust thing and the backstory, our backstories, of each other. If you go to trust, and Meister and Green did all the research on and created the trust equation, credibility, reliability, intimacy, all divided by self-interest, or they called it self-orientation. The stories we use can help us build intimacy.
Right.
They can help us reduce perceived self-interest. So stories help us break that down.
Right, okay.
Which then, it's building the numerator, reducing the denominator. So just from a pure mathematical perspective, it's going to increase trust.
I was always terrible at maths, but I'm following you.
Yeah.
That's good. And also, hilarious, self-orientation does sound much better than self-interest. It's a nicer way to frame it.
Yeah, and it's slightly different what they were talking about, but ultimately what we're talking about there is self-interest erodes trust.
Okay.
And when you're open with your stories, when you're vulnerable with your stories, you're creating the intimacy, which gives you space to demonstrate reliability and credibility.
Right. Actually, it relates back to somewhat to a conversation I was having a couple of episodes back with Ron Wood from Pricing Insight, where just the value-based pricing methodology, if you can create a story or a differentiator in some way, and I think this is a great way to do it with our personal brand, with any brand really, then that's how you get a pricing strategy that it gets that kind of multiple.
Yeah, but even think about the way cars are being sold today. I mean, I recently bought, a new car, and I think about it, I didn't actually associate with the numbers around the car.
Okay.
It was actually the lifestyle that they were creating. It was the narrative in the advertising that, got my family to sort of go, And it is a hybrid car. So already there's a narrative that's associated with hybrid that's aligned with where we are today as a society. And so, the story is what's appealing. You look at the ads on TV for cars, they don't talk about kilometers per litre. They don't talk about towing capacity. They don't talk about, things like that. They talk about, the Toyota Hilux, it's built tough.
Yeah.
It's unbreakable. And it's what everyone wants to be a part of. If you're a tradie, or if you live that outdoor lifestyle, it's a reliable car. So they're selling the lifestyle.
And trying to create a story that people can see themselves in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that relatability again, that sort of moving away from that self-orientation to I'm part of something bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. All right, well then, so we know why it matters. We know that it drives a hell of a return. In terms of creating narratives, what's the structure or the sort of the secret sauce that goes into making sure that you're you're able to deliver that to get the results you want.
Yeah, so there's two different types of stories that we talk about. There's the foraged ones, and then there's the crafted ones. The foraged ones, they're the ones that you find somewhere. They're the ones that you pick up. So the Significant Objects Project is a foraged story that I used to reinforce the point that stories are powerful. Mm-hmm. And so those are all over the place. You just have to be able to have your antenna up to hear them and see them. So again, it comes back to what we talked about earlier, intentionality. So know the behavior that you're trying to inspire or change. Know the message that you're trying to send. So you can then use those foraged stories. When it comes to the crafted stories, there's lots of different frameworks to craft stories. But if you think about it at its simplest level, there's a couple of things that we need to think about. One is authenticity. So as you're crafting your story, it needs to be authentic. Authentic stories have ups and downs. They're not just all, hey, the world is great or the world is bad. Mm-hmm. There's ups and downs, there's tension, there's stress, and that's what makes it interesting. So as you're crafting your story, it needs to reflect the reality of your situation, and more importantly, the situation of the person that you're delivering the story to.
Okay. So for example, if I can put you on the spot, so let's say that you're in a sales meeting and there is clearly a risk to choosing your service. There is a migration away from an existing incumbent, whatever it might be. It's best to own the fact that that is a thing that exists. Yeah. To then, but only in the sense that you've already big C conversation, you know what you're doing, that's part of a conversation, part of a narrative you're building, because the result here relies on you being honest and vulnerable about the fact that, yes, you understand the risk of that. That's kind of what you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah. But, if in that situation, you would probably start off by talking about what's changing in the world.
Right, okay.
That makes even the conversation that you're having with that person relevant.
Okay.
Then what's our common enemy? And that's where you may call out the risk in going towards your solution, because that may well be a part of the common enemy that you and that person are facing.
Okay.
And then you go to the promised land. What could the world look like? Now what you've got is a narrative structure.
Okay.
And it's only after that that you start selling your product, because now you've connected with the person with this narrative that says, hey, I understand the pain. I understand what's changing in the world. Yes, there is some risk, but there's also this promised land that we both like to go to. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, here's my product. Here's my offering.
And I don't want to be too much salesy, but in a way, everything's kind of sales, selling ourselves, selling our idea, whatever it might be. So in your experience, are you better to try and address things as here's a problem we can solve, or an opportunity we can achieve, or something we can grasp? Is there a which one's more powerful, the sort of hope, the opportunity ahead of us, or here's a problem you need to get away from?
Yeah, someone I used to work with talked about the burning ambition versus the burning platform.
Okay.
Too much burning platform creates fear. Mm-hmm. Not enough. There isn't the same impetus for change.
Absolutely.
And too much burning ambition without the burning platform sometimes could be a little bit insincere. Mm-hmm. You need to acknowledge back to the authentic story, ups and downs in the world. So it's actually going to be a fine balance that you have to run there. This idea of ambition versus the reality of the platform.
Okay.
If they're both burning, which is great, but you need to balance the two.
And how important is it the person you're speaking to? Because people, I'm pretty sure you told me this and highlighted this in the presentation I sent with you, but people are wired differently. People respond differently to different triggers. People have, I guess, a different way of seeing the same conversation. So how much do you need to adjust your narrative to your audience? And sometimes is that even possible?
You were actually that's the second point on here. And no, we didn't actually coordinate where the points were.
Going great.
But it is the second point. It's, one of the other important things as you're crafting your narrative is actually to know your audience.
Okay.
Because if you want to achieve an impact, you need to know what is important to them. Mm-hmm. So depending on what type of conversation you're having, if it's up on stage in front of 300 people, researching the audience, making sure you understand who's in the room. If it's just like this, understand what's important to you and me.
Yep.
But actually understanding your audience helps you firstly design the conversation to deliver the outcome, but also adjust in the moment. because you are going to have to adjust. No conversation will go perfectly to plan. But having the plan allows you to adapt. Without a plan at all, you're constantly reacting.
And I guess there it's because you touched on authenticity and also I guess vulnerability. You can't be a different version of yourself and sort of there's a spectrum, I imagine, within which you can still be yourself, but be addressing the needs of your particular audience. But there's that need to still be authentic, and people can see through it pretty quickly when you're not being genuine. So I guess there's just a need to realize that you change the message, but don't change kind of maybe who you are or how you're perceived.
Yeah,
it's a balancing act, right? Yeah,
you need to be authentic because go back to trust, self-interest. If people see through it, that see through the lack of authenticity, they see an inauthentic person in front of them, they'll perceive high self-interest, which will erode any trust that you're trying to build.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. So I feel like really the next step for us to go through is just there's got to be some structure into this, right? And I'm sure there's different ways, but how do you? What model do you suggest people run with to actually craft those narratives?
Yeah, so there's one very simple model, which we spoke about when we did the session. Very, very simple, focused essentially on three separate items. First and foremost, and this was a term that was introduced to me a few years ago, this idea of a microscript. So when you think about the outcome you're trying to create from your narrative, from your capital C conversation, not what do you want people to hear? What do you want them walking away repeating?
Oh, like that.
It's a much higher bar because you can have someone hear a very complicated message, but they could never repeat it. So you have to figure out a way to simplify the message. Make it so precise, so concise that anyone can walk away and repeat it.
And I guess you don't necessarily have a lot of opportunity yourself to repeat it enough times that they can't help but hear it. You've kind of got one or two shots of this.
Yeah. So that then leads to the second part, which is essentially about your elevator pitch, which is why do you believe that? What has led you to that conclusion? And what reinforces that conclusion or that statement or whatever it is that you want them to say? You want them to genuinely believe. And the elevator pitch in itself is a narrative. It's simple. It should form some sort of structure, but they are simple statements that could be declared within a minute that say, when you say your statement, someone looks at it and goes, oh, okay, so there's the three reasons you believe that.
Nice. Yeah. Elevator pitches are so tough too.
Yeah. But they should form some sort of a structure in themselves. And this is one of the mistakes people make when using techniques like this. They use almost like siloed statements that are just random things. They should follow some sort of a logical structure, your elevator pitch. It could be, here's the problem, here's the opportunity, here's the solution. It could be the world, our company, you and me. But there should be some logical flow to the statements because then your microscript gets reinforced within those three structures or four or five, however many. Usually three is good, but I've seen it done with five, no more than five though.
Okay.
And only then afterwards do we start adding in the evidence. So the microscript, the elevator pitch, the evidence. We call the structure, metri, M-E-E, microscript, elevator pitch, and evidence. And this is where the hard part really comes in. Because our human tendency is to throw a lot of information forward. We have to be really, really careful. What's a piece of data? Not lots of data. What's that moment where, you can get them to go, oh, crap.
And to do that, you have to understand, again, who you're speaking to and have different messages for different audiences, right?
Yeah. And then find potentially a forage story or potentially a crafted story that combined with the data reinforces the statement that you just made. And you should have that combination for each of the different statements you have in your elevator pitch. I had a client who used this framework 12 years ago. I spoke to him a few months ago. He still remembers the delivery of that speech that he did. It was a 45-minute speech off one page. He had the metri structure, and he still remembers he could deliver it today. It was so simple, so straightforward for him because he did the work up front. And he got a round of applause when in actual fact he was saying that he's going to be changing the business, and potentially, a lot of people's pet projects were going to go away, but they still understood it. They embraced it because they understood it, and he delivered it in a very compelling way.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what this whole session's been about. So I guess because we're pretty much out of time, you said to me beforehand that you wanted to open up the offer for that metri concept.
Yeah, so we have a template that we used with First Focus for the metri. We're happy to actually give that to your viewers, your listeners. If you just send an email to hello@brasstax.net.au, and I think you'll put that information in the show notes. If you just put in the header poster and just where you want, your details, we'll make sure that we send it to you or to the audience. And we're happy to dive into that with people if they want to ask any questions.
Sounds great.
So someone in my team will get back as quickly as possible to everyone who sends just poster. We'll send them the poster. It's an A1 PDF. And it has pretty much a lot of what we've spoken about today on there.
Yeah, I remember going through it with you last time, and it was definitely a really, really powerful and succinct not platform, but structure to work to get the outcome, right? I think we only had about an hour and a half, and we came out with some pretty good stuff in that session. So, okay, look, again, we'll put all of those details in the show notes. So if you are watching this, check it out below on YouTube. If you're on Spotify or iTunes, go look at YouTube. Ron, thank you so much for coming in. Love your work. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brenton.